This is Arirang Radio.
Good Morning Seoul, weekdays 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. The latest updates and current events and trends. What's in a question? Maybe just about everything important. A smart and sharp question should strike up a more engaging conversation. Diane joins us in the studio to talk about growing concerns in South Korea, where, yes, as we discussed before, population is decreasing every year, possibly falling through a demographic cliff. Why is this important? We're joined by Diane this Monday morning for all the updates. Good morning.
Good morning, Lena. Happy Monday for you.
Happy Monday. How was your trip?
It was good.
It was so short-lived.
It was short, but it was good. It was worth it.
It was relaxing?
No, it was a lot of playing golf.
It was very outdoorsy and eventful.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's nice to see you back in the studio.
Thank you.
Let's remind our listeners, what is our discussion topic again?
All right, so question, what's happening to South Korea? I know it's a broad question.
Big question.
It's a big question, but today's question is something that's going to affect every part of a country, which is people. I mean,
quite possibly the most important set of resources.
Right.
I think.
I mean, people are regarded as the greatest assets of any country. This is because people putting their in their labor and expertise play an important part in the development of the economy and of society.
And when society stops growing, when the economy stops developing and turns stagnant, what does it mean for everybody left within?
Right.
We all know by heart and have learned that people are the power engine of any economy. But let's remind our listeners once more the importance of the general population again.
Right. So simply put, without people, there's no country, right?
Sure.
The population is an important in our country because one, people are an important resource for development because they provide human capital.
Sure.
Two, development depends upon the availability of skilled people who can work in the agriculture, industry, and services sector. And three, without a healthy population, we cannot build a large economically developed world.
If that wasn't obvious, just a friendly reminder, everyone.
Right.
Because sometimes we need to take a look at why we keep obsessing over this population decline. If we're not prepared for it, what
Right.
kind of consequences South Korea may have to live with within our lifetime. So where does South Korea stand right now when it comes to our population?
So with the ever low birth rate, South Korea's overall population has been decreasing for a while. Right now, an estimated statistics for the population stands at 51 million. The demographic growth rate has been on a downward trend starting from 2021 when the number plunged to negative 0.18% that year for the growth rate.
Sure.
And this year's rate is expected to drop further, currently standing at negative 0.23%.
Oh, we're not getting a break with no really big resolutions in sight. Honestly, a government can implement a few perks here and there, but it's not enough.
Right.
As we talked about so many times in our headlines and in other segments, decreasing birth rate is making all this worse.
Of course, last year, about 260,000 babies were born compared to 2001 when it was about 560,000. The number of annual births have halved in 20 years. Meanwhile, during the same period, the number of deaths increased from 244,000 to about 308,000. The country has been experiencing a period of natural decline in the population with more deaths than births for the third consecutive year, and that gap is widening. A low birth rate, and even before that, fewer marriages. So think about this. There are more funerals to attend than weddings, it seems, these days. So last year, the number of marriages stood only at 192,000, compared with the number of deaths, with the number going over 320,000. It's safe to say that there are more funerals than weddings. Whereas 20 years ago, the difference in the number of deaths and marriages was not that big. Even it was the reverse trend.
Okay, so there was even maybe more weddings than funerals at one point. Now,
Right.
These are all considered indices for a country to calculate whether it's in a state of a demographic cliff or not.
Right. There is another indicator of the era to call the population cliff. According to the Statistics Korea, the number of one-year-olds this year stands at 270,000.
Okay.
On the other hand, the 6-year-old population is about 800,000. The population for the 60th birthday party is about 3 times times greater than the population for the first birthday parties. If divided by 365 days, first birthday parties average 740 times a day, and 60th birthday parties average over 2,000 times a day.
Thank you for doing the simple math.
Right, so it's a big difference, right? 1-year-olds are included in the working age population after 14 years when they become 15 years old. An 6-year-old becomes 74-year-old in 14 years. So when looking at the structure of the old age dependency ratio 14 years later, which is a ratio of the elderly per 100 working age population, it's a typical improper fraction. The old age dependency ratio, which was 24.6 this year, will be 51.1 after 14 years. This means that the burden on the working age population will double after 14 years. So for those like who's 1-year-olds right now, after when they grow up, they have a lot of people to
essentially
support.
take care of,
right.
Not literally, but by paying more taxes and not having enough people to work. But we have predicted this to happen for some time. Now, how to slow it down is an awfully tricky question. The decreasing population as a society develops is actually a pretty natural course of action.
Right. A country with fewer children and more elderly people was a determined future for sure. However, the government did not expect that the low fertility and aging population would proceed so quickly. Statistics Korea publishes future population projections every 5 years by dividing them into high, middle, and low levels by scenario. The high rank is the best scenario for the country, and the low rank is the worst case scenario.
Sure.
And based on their low case scenario, the agency suggested the bottom of the total fertility rate will be reached in 2026 in their forecast in December 2011. And the bottom of the total fertility rate announced in the December 2016 forecast was in 2025, so which is really near. However, the total fertility rate predicted in 2011 and 2016 low level projections for last year were 1 and 1.1 respectively. However, the actual total fertility rate last year was only 0.81.
Okay, so we make these predictions, and if it happens too quickly, these changes, that's also a marker for concern.
Yes.
So the reality is worse than they had expected.
So it was way worse. As a result, the low fertility rate situation has become more serious than worst case scenario suggested by the government. As the ultra low fertility situation continued, the total population declined and also accelerated. The total population is calculated by taking into account the international movement of the population, in addition to births and deaths. In the special projection for 2019, the point at which the total population will decrease and hit the rock bottom was suggested as 2029. However, the total population has already declined last year and starting to go down from there.
Okay, then, of course, then it comes why, right? Was there any reason put out by the government why the projections were a bit off?
So one of the possible reasons is related to the social and cultural behavior of the eco-boom generation. The number of births started to decline in the 1980s and continued to remain at 6,000 per year until 1990. However, from 1991 to 1995, the annual birth rate rose to 700,000. So it was a little better.
Okay.
It's the influence of the parents of the eco-boom generation, which had a large population. Accordingly, the government's consistent prediction was that the total fertility rate would rebound from the early mid-2020s when these eco-boom generation became parents. I think the experts are referring to the millennials. As eco-boom generations. So there was a big boom for our parents' generation, right? And they gave a lot of birth to us, like the millennials. And the government is saying that because we grew and became adults, a lot of increased population would give birth to more population, which will decrease the burden for the country.
Because that's what we grew up on, that we would naturally replicate what our parents' generation did. Okay.
Yeah. So, however, the government's prospects were misguided as young people driven by competition. They postponed even gave up on marriage. So the government's huge budget for the low birth rate measures were also useless.
Because you can't really overturn a low birth rate if people are ambitious and they want to keep their jobs and they don't trust that current infrastructure can support a bigger family. So what are some other suggestions or solutions the government is trying now? Because they are consistently trying, to be fair.
Of course. In this situation, the government announced that it would respond to the population problem problem by preparing a public-private joint population response system with the participation of related ministries, research institutes, and private experts. The first Vice Minister of the Ministry of Strategy and Finance will take the lead in the Population Response Task Force, which will take measures sequentially from next month.
Okay.
The 4 areas in which the government has established a response plan are to expand the economically active population, prepare for a shrinking society, prepare for an aging society, and respond to a low birth rate. Extension or abolition of the retirement age is being discussed in the terms of expanding the economically active population.
Right.
And in order to respond to the decline in the economically active population, it's necessary to either re-enter the labor market for the employees or import foreign workers and make women and the elderly to come back who have had relatively low labor force participation rates.
Okay, that's a lot of grounds to cover.
Right.
Because you're also not getting to the facts. So what's the discrepancy between what the young people want and what the
Right.
old people want? Because yes, it sounds all great on paper to extend the retirement age. We're living longer, healthier lives.
Right.
But then does that make it more fierce in the job market for
Right.
young employees to land a job of their dreams? The list really does go on. And for women and elderly to return to work, there needs to be a job, right?
Of course.
Okay, so a lot of questions in hand, but it seems like at the very least they're putting together a task force to tackle this one by one.
Right.
All of this to increase the working population in the future. Then what about the low birth rate? What are they going to do about that?
So that's I think, more difficult
I think so
problem
too.
to solve.
Sure.
In order to respond to the low fertility rate, a plan to increase the cash aid provided so far has been suggested. Starting from January next year, parents' salaries of 700,000 won for just first child and 350,000 won for 1-year-old children will be paid monthly. And from next year, the amount will be increased to 1 million won and 500,000 won, respectively.
Okay.
And in consideration of the need to create an environment for raising children along with cash support, the period of parental leave will be increased from 1 year to 1.5 years, and the period of maternity leave for spouses, elementary school care classes, and after-school hours will also be extended. So we have all these support systems that the government is trying to give the parents to boost the fertility rate.
Government subsidies is a great place to start, but fundamentally, like you said, I mean, there are 2 angles to actually tackle this problem from. How do
Right.
you give people incentive or at least a trust to return to work and raise children? It's a
Right.
proper infrastructure. Unfortunately, this is not the last time we'll talk about this.
Yeah,
We'll
sadly.
probably take this apart and eventually tackle one by one
Right.
to see if we're making progress. But thank you, as always, Diane, for getting us all caught up.
All right, I'll see you tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow. As promised, we do have a special interview coming up next because we did successfully launch the Nuri. Not we, Kari did. There's a lot of excitement around what this means for South Korea's space projects in the coming months, years, and decades. So we'll have a special interview with a doctor from the Korea Aerospace Research Institute coming up next.